Today it is my pleasure to introduce to you Olivia Hall, who has been looking at how the city spends its money and wonders if money might be more helpful if it's redirected to human services. Good morning, Olivia.
Hi, hello, Senior Center. First, I just want to thank you guys for having me today. It's a huge honor. I know what an institution the Bainbridge Island Community Center is, and I'm just really grateful to be here. So, as you said, I put on a town hall about 2 weeks ago now regarding the police funding on the island and comparing that to Health and Human Services. And I'm going to kind of go through that presentation now. I've moved it around a bit, and I have kind of truncated a bit because Rasham is much more well-versed in some of those slides than I am. So I'm going to do sort of an overview. But if you do want to see the entire town hall, I'm going to be sending out an email probably on Monday with the original town hall slides, as well as some more information about Health and Human Services, as well as police funding on Bainbridge Island. So I want to, before I put the slides up, I just want to come to this conversation with the understanding about how I view personally, and I'm not speaking for anybody who did the town hall or anything, but how I come to the idea of public safety, and that public safety for me really involves all of our health and human services as well as the police, and that a safe community, and one of the reasons Bainbridge is so safe, in my opinion, one of the many reasons, but one of the reasons is that we do have really great available health and human resources here. So that's stuff like the Senior Center, but there are a bunch of other places as well that really support our community in a way that, you know, prevents crime or crime. So I'm going to pull up my, okay.
Screen sharing.
Screen sharing, there we go. Boop, 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 boop. Cool. All right, so everybody can see, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so this number, $345,250 is how much was spent on all health and human services on Bainbridge Island in 2020. This is through their grant process, which I'm sure the Senior Center is very familiar with. And that's spread across all of the health and human services resources on the island. So I'm just going to go through a couple of those and get you, just get an idea of what those grants look like, where they go, and how they could go further. So HRB is Housing Resources Bainbridge. I'm sure you guys are super familiar with that. They manage 103 affordable units on the island. They run an independent living program and provide homeowner assistance for homeowner down payment assistance for residents of Bainbridge Island. So just by the numbers, and again, these are all pretty broad. I didn't want to overwhelm everybody with too many numbers. But the current needs of HRB, they have about $1 million yearly operating expenses. And then around, they're fundraising right now for $8 million to purchase around 30 units of affordable housing at 550 Madrona, which I'm sure a lot of people are really familiar with, as well as developing units of affordable housing on their Erickson property. In 2020, they requested through the grant process from COBE $114,841 and received $58,000 from COBE. So I made a benchmark for this just to kind of give us an idea with $1 million. $1 million also just happens to be 5% of the entire Harrison Police Court budget. So that was another reason we used the $1 million benchmark. So with $1 million, HRB could cover the entirety of their operating expenses. They could assist up to 500 clients with safety and accessibility upgrades to their home. And that means keeping people who have maybe mobility issues and stuff like that in their homes that they already live in, rather than trying to place them somewhere else by, ramps and accessibility upgrades that way. And also with $1 million, they could give down payment assistance on 5 affordable homes on Bainbridge Island. So that is HRB. Bainbridge Youth Services is another great resource on the island, one that I wish I had when I was a youngster. They offer free confidential counseling for the youth on the island. They also offer tutoring services and parent services, including, and as well, they have support groups for survivors of sexual assault and other topics as well. So they really serve our youth incredibly. Their yearly operating expenses is about $400,000 for programs and expenses. So that's everything from pencils to their executive director's salary. You know, like it's all in that 400,000 to tutors to all of that. Their 2020 award, they asked $85,000 for operating expenses, and they received about $51,250. Not about, exactly. With, again, $1 million, which is just this easy benchmark that we can kind of compare everything to. They could do 2 full years of their operating expenses as is, and they could really increase the hours for counselors and tutors. Well, not tutors, tutors are actually volunteers, for counselors to significantly increase support for the youth. And I do know during COVID and during 2020, they got a bit of a spike for, you know, counselors for the youth on Bainbridge, because, you know, we all needed more counseling in 2020. And then finally, Helpline House. And Helpline House is, you know, another institution on this island. It was like, we were just talking about how it was the first organization on the island I was introduced to. And they offer free confidential counseling. Oh no, excuse me, wrong note. They have a robust food bank. They also have rental assistance, which means, you know, if somebody's struggling for a few months because, I don't know, they couldn't go to work because there was a global pandemic, they helped a lot of residents of Bainbridge Island be able to make their rent through their rental assistance program. And they actually received a little bit more money beyond that $345,000 from City Council in 2020 to support that rental assistance program to be able to keep people in their homes. They also provide counseling and assistance to people who are experiencing homelessness. So again, by the numbers, Helpline House has about $800,000 yearly operating and program expenses, pencils to executive directors. Excuse me, it kind of fluctuated during COVID because their volunteers went down because of COVID, so it goes back and forth, but around $800,000 to $1 million is what they usually spend. In 2020, they requested $85,000, and they also received $51,250 for their operating expenses. Again, with that $1 million, that's a full year of operating expenses for Helpline House, and they could feed 700 families of 4 for a year through their food bank with $1 million, and that would be the majority of the low income population on the island is about 700. So that's a huge dent. And that it could also double the islanders served through their rental assistance program, meaning that if you live on Bainbridge Island and you have trouble 1 month, you know, paying your rent, there's a much higher possibility with this $1 million to be able to remain in your home. So that's all I've done on those 3. I mean, obviously there are a ton of health and human resources on the island, and they all vie for this, you know, $350,000. This is a selection. It's not the whole thing because it didn't really fit on the slide, of the 2020 requests and the 2020 awards. I think the most important thing to take away from this slide is that nobody gets fully funded by the city. The only people who do get fully funded, the one person who got fully funded, or organization, is the senior center, but it was I think it was a $10,000 grant you guys got. That was the only one that was fully funded in the 2020 cycle. So now we're going to talk about the police department. So the town hall that this deck is really based on, and what brought me into this conversation, what made me interested, was based on the Bainbridge Island Police Department. And I just want to preface one with all the information that you just saw and you're going to see is all public record. I did some FOIA requests, and some of them are just on websites, mostly the Kobe website, and they're accessible to everybody. But I also, and then second, I want to say that everything that I say and I have said and I will say is these are my thoughts, my ideas, my perception, my finding of the numbers, and I don't speak for anybody who was on the town hall. I don't speak for the city council. I don't speak for anybody other than myself. But and finally, I just want to preface that again, I really consider public safety not just about the police. I think that I know that I'm coming to this conversation about police considering and taking into account that places like Helpline and HRB and Senior Center are huge, invaluable parts of how we keep this community safe. And that's just, I really just want to drive that home right now. So $5,538,870 is how much our public safety or our Bainbridge Island Police Department expenditures for 2019. We don't have the 2020 numbers yet. Those numbers don't really come out until June. So this is from the comprehensive annual financial report, which the island puts out every June. As you can see here, this is the expenditures budget pie chart that we made. It's again, you can see the source down there, which is from the comprehensive annual financial report. And the yellow bit here, can you see my cruiser?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So this is public safety, which is the policing, which is that $5.5 million. And then here is the health and human services, the stuff that we were talking about before, that $345,000.
Just a sliver.
Yes, it's quite small. It's actually 2.6%, and public safety is at about 38.2%. So just to give you context of those two numbers. And then I got really interested when I looked at the numbers, what public safety looks like or policing looks like on the island. So I did some more requests for information, and the first thing that I found were calls for service. And it's important to know that calls for service are initiated when, the top calls for service were patrol checks, traffic stops, and 911 hangups in 2019. So traffic stops and 911 hangups, pretty self-explanatory. Patrol checks are either initiated by 911 dispatch, which is out of the county, or initiated at the police officer's discretion. So patrol checks are what is really just implied by the title. It's, you see something, you call the police, and a patrol check is logged, or an officer witnesses something, and that initiates a patrol check at their discretion. Often what we found from some of the records that we pulled and the people that we spoke to, a lot of the patrol checks include citizens calling with concerns about house parties or public drinking, or suspicious characters was a big one. And a really big one also was people calling the police to check on their homes while they were on vacation.
Oh,
that was another big one. So the next step, I guess, escalation step from calls for service would be incident report. So an incident report is when a call for service actually means that something actually happened that is worth reporting, I would assume. So, or not, I would assume, I know. So that means somebody asks to a police officer to go to somebody's house, and they actually do to check on somebody's house, and they find a broken window. That would initiate an actual incident report. So, excuse me. So what I glean, and I'm curious to see what you see in this, is that the calls for service for Bainbridge Island Police very rarely result in an actual crime being committed. A very, very small sliver of them incur actual incident reports. I will say in May of 2020, which is when this was pulled, there was actually, the reason that's so much bigger is because there was a lot of COVID related fraud, identity fraud. And that's why.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's why that one is so much bigger.
Wow.
So I'm assuming it was all identity. It was a lot of identity fraud, and I'm assuming it has to do with, just to make sure that I sourced that correctly. So when I saw how few incident reports there were, I wanted to go a little bit deeper because I get really interested. And I pulled some actual incident reports from patrol checks on Bainbridge Island. So these are a smattering of kind of quotes from patrol checks, patrol check incident reports from a single month on the island. And as you can see, it's things like skateboarding, things like they don't look like they belong here, and teens. Just, there were a couple of just teens having a party, teens loitering, drinking, and stuff like that. Obviously, they don't really end up in anything serious a lot of the time. They were cooperative and left the area when asked. And then also dealing, calling the police to, I guess, move along our population that is experiencing homelessness.
Mm.
So, yeah, that just gives sort of a, I'm just trying to narrow it down to get things really specific, but I think the broad, yeah, we have a broad understanding of what a lot of the policing looks like on this island.
Yes.
So I'm not going to go directly into the Harrison Police Court project because frankly, I don't have the institutional knowledge that some of my, other people in the community do have. But I will say that, it is budgeted right now at $20 million for the entire project. Sources have told us that it's probably going to go over that just because all projects do. Half of that, or almost half of that, has already been spent on the Harrison building. And we're kind of, in my opinion, it feels to me as though we are at a crossroads where we can either continue to spend money on the police department in this way that is towards the Harrison project itself, or we can reevaluate. And there are other options out there for Bainbridge Islanders beyond putting the police department in Harrison. There are other options. My personal dream, and again, I speak for literally nobody else but myself, is that the Harrison building is turned into like a mixed use Health and Human Services building, where, one floor you can get counseling for youth, another floor there's, a food bank, another floor has a communities, services center or a community space, and another, and then on the top there's a few affordable senior living apartments that people can live in and volunteer and whatnot. And again, that's just my opinion, but we have a building, Kobe, we own a building, and we also have other options for the police department as far as what their renovations or revamp looks like. Harrison is not the only option. We can spend the same amount of money and get 2 facilities, a police department and a Health and Human Services, facility for the same amount. But again, I don't want to get too deep into those numbers because I don't know them by heart like some of our other community members do. But again, if you want to really dive deeper into that discussion, I've dropped, I believe it's still in there, in a link. Oops.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's still there. Okay, a link to a form you can send out, you can fill in to send me your email, and I will be sending everybody a link to the original town hall, as well as a letter to City Council regarding policing on Bainbridge Island and the Harrison project, with all of these email addresses in there as well. But yeah, I guess I just want to leave with the, when we were talking about this before, with the sentiment that, City Council makes these decisions, they decide, but they decide with what you are, what the citizenry how the citizenry informs them. But they don't know unless we tell them what we want. And I think it's just really important that we make ourselves really clear in what Bainbridge really values and needs. So yeah, I really encourage you, no matter how you feel, I really encourage you to speak to your city council members, write your city council members, and vote in this next election, and pay attention to what people are saying, and ask them the candidates questions as well, because you know, it takes 4 votes on city council to make a big change. So remember that, and that's important to remember. So again, I just want to say thank you to city
Sheila
council.
has a question.
Okay.
I do. And maybe I missed this, Olivia, while so you were speaking and so on and so forth, but listening and reading at the same time, which was not probably the best thing, was reading the transcript. I mean, what the pros and cons of Harrison?
Well,
Just to make it very simple.
it's a lot of money, in my opinion. Again, like this is my opinion. It is a massive amount of money for a place that is very, very safe. You know, and yes, the police department does need renovations to their facility, but in my humble opinion, I feel like we're killing a fly with a hammer with Harrison, rather than allocating the appropriate amount of funds to the project, in line not just with what, you know, the police want, but what the community actually needs. And I'm curious as to, are you familiar with the McKenzie Report at all?
I haven't read it, no.
So the McKenzie Report, you know, made a much smaller, I don't have it in front of me, a much smaller valuation for how much the Harrison, or not, the Harrison wasn't even on the board at that point, but what the new police court facility would cost. It would cost like a significantly less than $20 million. So I guess me as a citizen, I'm curious how we went from, I think it was about 8 million originally projected from the Harrison project to 20 million in years. Meanwhile, and how it is so easy, or it seems so easy for the city council and for the police department to allocate $20 million to a police department, when our health and human services have to share 2% of the budget.
The slice of pie, the little slice.
Yeah, it feels very, if we had a crazy crime rate on the island, I would understand.
Right.
Maybe, but we don't.
Yeah.
We live, you know, Bainbridge is really safe. It is really safe. And now I think a lot of the health and human services make it not only safe, but it also makes it accessible to people to stay here. And to be able to afford living here mentally and financially, and, you know, having the food that they need to eat.
You know,
that was more than just a pro and a con. Sorry.
Well, I'm puzzled, and I've voiced this before, is that I used to be a patient there at Harrison. And the building is not that old. And it's state of the art. And I just cannot wrap my arms around why this renovation would be this much. I mean, I understand they need to move walls and whatnot, but the basic expensive infrastructure is there. And so I'm, and this is my opinion, this is not the opinion of the senior center, that I'm having a difficult time wrapping my arms around this, you know, outrageous amount. And so
also the police department is, you know, they do have different requirements for building, right? Like they have different from something that is just an office building. They have different, I'm sure they have different needs infrastructurally, which
Probably communication.
what?
Communication's probably a big one with them.
Yeah, stuff like that. So, but at the same time, like it's a very large building.
It's very
Very
large. And like I said, it's not that old and it's state of the art. And it's a medical facility that was, also built to the standards of a medical facility. It also has strict standards too. So,
Right.
Is there a problem with the police department sharing the Harrison building with mental health? Da, 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 da?
oh, good question.
In my humble opinion, if I was somebody who was experiencing homelessness and I was having a mental health crisis and I wanted to go somewhere to get help, if the first thing I saw was a police officer, I would probably not be inclined to seek that help.
Yeah.
I think that the conversation with the police officers in the planning of this is important, to keep them in the conversation with Health and Human Services, because I think that we all work together to keep this place safe. But I think logistically, having things like counseling and people who are, having a rough time in the same building as the police officers and the police court is.
And with the sirens going off all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that makes it. Are there plans, other possibilities for the use of the Harrison building other than for the police department?
Formally, no.
I mean, it's owned, the building is owned by Kobe?
Yep.
Okay.
Kobe owns the building.
I'm sorry?
I can't remember, how much was that purchased for?
About $9 million.
9 million, yeah.
Oh, so a little bit more than the 8 million.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, the 8 million was what was supposed to be able to refurbish it to be for a court and the police department. That was the original, that's what we were told. It turned out to be 20.
Right, so not, there's 11 mil.
Yeah, so that's a lot of money. That's a lot of our taxpayers' dollars.
And like I said, like a lot of our sources who work in architecture, who build these type of, police courts, and they built, people who've built things like Fire 21, they say that that's a low estimate, the 20 million.
Wow.
But it would most likely, because of the size of what they're asking for and whatnot, it would end up being probably more like 23, 24.
Tell me a little bit about McKenzie Report. What?
Well, I mean, it was a 400-page report that included everything from the Fire 21. That's where that came from, and they stayed pretty on budget for that, as far as what was said in the McKenzie Report and what was printed on black and white in this McKenzie Report. But they also they did a theoretical, not theoretical, but they did a bunch of different plans. So a plan for a single police station, a police and fire station, a plan for a police court facility, a standalone police department. And they kind of put out the numbers that way. They did not, though, take into account, and so with those things, you get numbers like square footage, right? And the square footage that the police department will need. The square footage comes from how many police officers they're expecting to have, right?
Mhm.
And the number of police officers they're expected to have, and according to the McKenzie Report, was about 32 by 2026. We have 31 now. So, and that number of how many police officers that we need, what was not taken into account by how many police officers that we need in the McKenzie Report was the crime rate. There was no methodology that I could find in the McKenzie Report that says we came to this number from the amount of crime on the island.
Did they mostly use it because of population expanding? Is it, do you think that's why they decided to? I don't know. I would
I
like
think
to.
part of it is population, but we looked at other towns that have 3 times the population that we do, who have smaller force, who have.
I know we have a very large force.
Yeah. So yeah, I think you get into really mucky territory when you start comparing us to other places, unfortunately, because this is such a systemic understanding of what policing is.
Right.
That makes any sense? That like most communities consider police to be public safety rather than, you know, community center.
Right.
But what I'm saying is that I would really like to change the conversation that public safety is not just about the police. The police show up after something has happened.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Housing resources help somebody have a home,
right,
that they can live in, so they don't get, you know, pushed to the brink.
That's
Most
right.
of the a lot of the violent I'm trying to word this.
I know what you're trying to say. You're trying to say what sends people to desperation.
Right. It's mental health.
And it's their living situation, or, you know, what's going on. And that's what drives most people to desperation.
Right.
And if we could mitigate that, if we could stop that from happening to begin with
right.
good housing, good health care, good food, good mental health services, we can stop
right.
that.
And I think thank you for helping me along on that.
That's
one.
okay. I could see inside those eyes what you were thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's all I think about, and I forget that's the thesis, right? Like I get so in the weeds with the numbers and the sort of, you know, unfortunate politics of it all. But when it comes down to it, is that like people are safe when they have a place to live that is safe. Right. People are safe when they are fed. People are safe when they have, you know, support networks and communities that they feel like they can, you know, rely on.
Exactly.
And again, like, you know, that's not to say that like the police department isn't trying to be more community engaged. They do have the community health navigator now, Kelsey Lynch, who is full-time, but unfortunately, like they don't have we don't have the capacity to have somebody on for all calls, you know, like she doesn't go on every single call. Well,
and I think this is why we need to talk to our council people and let them know, you know, where we want to see our tax dollars going. You know, again, communication from our local people all the way up to our federal government is so important. We have to let them know what we want. You know, they're to represent us, and that is so important.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said before, it takes four votes, right?
Right.
It takes 4 votes to change how we fund these health and human services.
Yeah.
It takes, ultimately, that's really what it takes. You bring it to a council member and say, I want to rally for these, you know, to double our health and human services funding, which is still under $1 million, by the way.
I know. I mean, it's not crazy amount.
It's really, and the thing is also that's so important is that you guys exist. Senior Center already exists. Helpline House already exists. BYS already exists. These places don't need to be created. They exist. We just need to empower them to be able to really do their jobs, you know, as well as they can.
Olivia, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sheila.
And thank you for answering my questions. I mean, they are mostly fairly naive because I haven't been paying attention, but believe me, I'm paying attention now.
Yep.
That's the point. We got one. Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot to pay attention to.
No, seriously, like that's the reason I'm doing all of these things, right? Is I'm not trying to make you make up your mind. I just want you to know. you know, I just want you to know what's happening. That's all.
I just want to know, I just want to know so I can be educated about it.
Yeah.
That's all.
And call the chief. I've spoken to the chief of the police. I've called him. I've talked to him about these things. And I encourage people to do that too, talk to him and see what he needs or thinks he needs.
Yeah,
I think that's important. Talk to them. I have. So.
Well, thank you, Olivia. I'm going to say goodbye. You all have a good weekend.